It's over, or is it really? Because the story right now is that there are several countries right now all around the world, mostly China and Russia, but several countries nonetheless, that are now trying to band together in order to create a new currency or in order to make attempts to simply put to dethrone the power of the US dollar. In other words, what's going on is that there are several countries that are coming together in order to try to create a system so they no longer have to rely and they're trying to take down the US dollar. There is a new currency that they're trying to create called the BRICS, and so this is definitely something to get noted about. So the big idea is that in today's video, I want to talk about what's been going on in the end of the US dollar situation. You might have seen other videos. I'll give my personal insight, so hopefully there's still something original, even if you've seen other videos about this. I want to talk about, is the US dollar really ending? If the US dollar is ending, what should we do about this situation? And if the US dollar is not ending, to at least be informed about what's going on inside of our world right now at this current time. So with that being said, let's get this video rolling. But as always, real fast before we begin, you guys know the same exact drill, but like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell if you guys are brand new here, welcome, or you guys can decide, but it's up to you guys, but it is always greatly appreciated. But with that being said, let's get this video rolling and started. So in order to understand the situation, what's going on right now, I think it's important to start by maybe understanding a little bit about the history of the US dollar. Now, of course, you can jump around. There's going to be timestamps, but I do highly recommend listening through. The big idea is that while it is true that right now they're trying to dethrone the US dollar and, there's going to be a lot of attempts to kind of try to reduce its power, the really, really great news, at least certainly for us Americans, is that right now at this current time, the still dominant reserve currency is still the US dollar, which is the really, really great news. And so what this basically means is, in other words, the reserve currency, if you need a little bit of a background story, is that it's currently the main dominant currency around the world, meaning that it's accepted as the powerhouse to almost every country around the world. That's why we are so popular and why English is also partially spoken all over the place. It's because we're sort of the main character, in terms of like international trade and everything in that particular world, in finance, international trade, and money. We have held this status since 1921, so this has been going on for over 100 years, or basically a century now. Before that, it was held by France, and then it was held by Great Britain, and then it was held that way for about a 100-year cycle, which tends to repeat itself. So in other words, what this really means is that every single 100 years, there tends to be a brand new currency that takes over as the dominant. However, while it is true that we've hit the 100-year mark, the great news is that today, this era is actually pretty different. And we're going to explain a little bit why in a little bit. But it's important to notice is that right now at this time inside of just our world, in several countries, specifically Russia, China, they are actually trying to come together in order to create a system or a new currency called the BRICS. BRICS. The BRICS, it's simply just an acronym that stands for, and I'm going to just double check really quickly here. So it stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So those are the countries that are trying to come together right now. Now, will other countries join in? Possibly, very, very likely, because there are some countries that do not want to rely on the US. But I think the great news is that most countries are still very, very accepting of the US dollar, and they're okay being able to rely on the US dollar because they know about how much of a powerhouse it is in finance, or they don't have an option because of how powerful it is. They don't really have an option. But most of them, I think, are still very, very much okay with it. So why is this exactly happening? And the big idea is that there are several incidents leading up to this situation that really inspired this movement to happen the way it did. First off is that we do have the Russia and Ukraine war. After a lot of the stuff that happened in the conflict with foreign nations, I think the story is that in Russia, they wanted to basically end their connection with the US because they don't want to have to deal with the US anymore so that they can kind of govern on their own terms. In other words, a lot of countries, they really want to be able to just go independently, which makes sense in a lot of ways, just understandably why they want to do this. So because of this, they really want to cut ties with the US. So they're doing their best by, in other words, like just mentioned, creating their own currency so that we don't have to rely, or so they, because, I represent an American, admittedly. I am in America, and most people watching this are from America, but they do not have to rely on the US for everything that they want to do in the world of finance and international trade, and they can basically govern and act independently now because now they have the power inside. I know, for example, for a fact inside of Russia right now, the story is that the Chinese yuan has actually overtaken the US as the dominant currency of what's being traded over there right now. So that's actually relatively breaking and shocking news, and that's actually partially what's leading to so many of these videos that have been going on about whether or not the US dollar is really over. Now, is the dollar really over after all? And I think that the great news is that the US dollar, in my personal opinion, and because this is actually a very subjective topic because it depends on how you see it, feel free to leave your particular comments down below if you think the US dollar is really over. But my personal opinion is that I actually do think that the US dollar is going to be weakening. However, I don't believe the US dollar is going to be truly over and over, in the sense that I still do believe that the US dollar, for certainly in the near future, is going to maintain its power and status as the world's current reserve currency. Now, why do I believe this to be true? There are so many reasons, but this article really highlights several of the main dominant reasons, and it's really because while it is true that these 5 countries that I just named are, against relying on the US dollar, the really just, we'll just say general news is that much of the world still very much does rely on the US dollar and has a lot of confidence for it. So it's really a teamwork effort as well. So it's not that the US is trying to overpower all the other nations or anything like that, but it's that at the end of the day, there has to be a reserve currency, because there has to be a currency that all the countries can kind of link up together in order to conduct trade under. And so the story is that right now, at this current time in history, the US dollar is the dominant currency and the reserve currency inside of her. They're struggling, at the end of the day because of everything that's happening right now, but the story is that so are a lot of other countries. In other words, it's like saying, how sometimes you can have a country that's maybe not doing as well, but independently, it's still not as bad as a lot of the other countries. And you have to keep in mind is that there are a lot of other countries that have struggled with the power of their own currency for years and years and years and years. So the US, while they are going through a little bit of difficulties right now, it's not something that's as drastic. I think that this is something that's definitely more sensationalized inside of the news, but it's not something that's absolutely drastic. And at the end of the day, I do believe that, at least certainly for the near future, the US dollar is still relatively safe. The other reason why this tends to be relatively okay, and why I think the US is going to be relatively safe, is just because at the end of the day also, right now, while it is true that the US dollar, or just America as a country, is inside of a lot of debt and trade deficits, the really cool news is that they're actually okay with it. It's one of those weird systems where it's like, while it is true that they're, going through a lot of debt-related crisis situation, they are actually very much okay taking on a lot of debt. There are definitely limitations, of course, to how much they can do it, because if they, take on too much, they can't just print infinite money. Or can they? That's a very interesting question. And the answer is that they technically can continue printing infinite money. It is going to lead to a lot of inflation, but I think at this current time, they have a lot of it under control, or at least certainly that's what the media is going to portray, and it's believed that they currently have at this current time period. There are a lot of countries that are still buying things inside of the US at the end of the day. They are buying things such as like US Treasury, materials, supplies, conducting trade, all sorts of different things that are happening in the US. And as long as that statement remains true, the US is still going to have some level of power inside. And I think that's the relatively great news for us Americans to really just understand the story to what's happening at this time. So beyond that is that that's pretty much what I really wanted to cover in today's video. It's just to know is that the US dollar is currently safe at this time. There is a lot of sensationalism going on, but at the end of the day, I think that it's good to know at least that we're okay. And in terms of what we should do, we should just continue living our lives like regular. There's a lot of things, other kinds of economic issues we might have to deal with, but at least in terms of the end of the US dollar, that's basically what's the most important thing to know. So with that being said, if you guys made it to the end, thank you guys so much for watching. Maybe leave a comment, consider consider subscribing, hitting the bell. Remember to smash the like button, or you guys can decide, and if anything. But thank you guys so much for watching. As always, stay safe, stay well, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.